I feel like I'm part of some sick and twisted experiment. I've replayed that moment so many times in my mind. How it all happened, why it happened, and why they chose me. The story itself sounds impossible, like something out of a nightmare, or a lie so big it feels absurd to even speak it out loud. And yet, it's my reality. It's the truth. I've always carried this need to tell someone, to share what really happened. I've spent years in silence, but who could I tell? Who would believe me? Writing it down is the closest I'll ever get to truly sharing it. So, this is my story. I was kidnapped about 15 years ago, and now I'm sitting here in this small, strange space made entirely of dark wooden walls. It's hard to call this place anything other than a prison, though it might not look like one at first glance. The walls are too close, too confining, and the fire's flickering light seems to make the shadows stretch unnaturally long. Behind me, there's a door that leads into the rest of the house. The house feels deceptively normal. No windows, but otherwise, it could be anyone's home. Except, it isn't. The more I try to convince myself that this is just a regular place, the more I can feel something deeply wrong about it. The lack of windows that has always unsettled me. I find myself staring at the walls, wondering why they would design it this way. Are they hiding something from me? Maybe it's just another one of their strange experiments, some twisted psychological tactic to keep me off balance. Or maybe it means nothing at all, and I'm simply overthinking it after so much time spent in isolation. I can leave the house if I want. The door is always open. In fact, I have quite a bit of space to walk around outside. But the moment I step out there, I feel like an animal in a zoo. A zoo where the visitors watch me from a distance, afraid to come too close, as if I'm poisonous. I sometimes wonder if the open door is another part of their experiment. Maybe they're watching to see if I'll try to escape. Maybe they want me to step outside so they can study me more closely. Maybe the open door is simply meant to give me the illusion of freedom. I don't know. The isolation is unbearable. It's not just the loneliness. It's the kind of isolation that crawls into your soul, eroding your sense of what's real. The emptiness outside the house mirrors the emptiness inside me. There are no landmarks, no sense of direction, nothing to tell me where I am. It's like I've been dropped into a void, completely cut off from everything familiar. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know why I'm here or what they want from me. I don't even know if they're taking samples from me. Maybe they do it while I'm asleep. But it feels like they're more interested in my mind, my thoughts. That's what they seem to be after. Every time they make me go through one of their strange tests, it's never about whether I succeed or fail. I don't think they care if I complete the task or mess up halfway through. No, they're more focused on how I think, on why I make the choices I do. It's like they're trying to dissect my brain without ever laying a hand on me. I've tried talking to them when they come near, asking who they are, what they want. But every time I speak, they freeze in place and just stare at me. It gives me chills, makes my skin crawl, like they're trying trying to get inside my head without saying a word. And they never respond. Not once. No acknowledgement. No sound. Just that silent, unsettling gaze. I'm almost certain they understand what I'm saying, even though they never answer. They don't talk to each other either. Not while I'm watching. I've been here long enough to know they won't hurt me. At least not physically. But that doesn't mean I'm safe. The way they watch me. The way they dissect me with their eyes. The weight of their silence. Their scrutiny. It's like they're breaking me down piece by piece, without ever laying a hand on me. Every day, the questions gnaw at me. Who are they? What do they want? Why am I here? The answers feel just out of reach, like a shadow slipping away the moment I get close. But I can feel something, a truth lurking beneath the surface, something dark and terrible. And I'm terrified of what I'll find when I finally uncover it. At least, that's how it used to be for the first few years. I'll never forget how it all began. I was sick. Fever. Coughing. Fatigue. Just another cold. But it lingered. Lasted longer than I expected, though not severe enough to be alarming. My head felt foggy, clouded in that way it always does when you're sick. But something about this time was different. It's the dreams that still haunt me. I've had fever dreams before, strange and disorienting, but these were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. They started subtly enough, but as the nights went on, they grew darker, more violent. It was as if some primal force inside me was breaking loose. Each night, I was angrier, more aggressive, like a beast losing control of itself. And the dreams, they became brutal. In those last nights before I recovered, I found myself attacking people, chasing them, tearing at them, trying to bite them. You're supposed to forget dreams, right? They fade, slip away. But not these. Even now, 15 years later, I can still feel them, lurking at the edge of my mind. I don't think I'll ever forget them. On the third or fourth day of being sick, I noticed something strange. There was a mark on my arm, like someone had taken a sample from me. It wasn't a scratch or bruise, but more deliberate. I couldn't figure out how it got there. I hadn't left my house during the sickness, so how? My mind was too clouded to dwell on it. Exhaustion overtook me, and I slipped back into sleep, pushing the oddity out of my mind. But then, I woke to an intensely bright light shining through my window, almost blinding. It was so bright, I couldn't make out its source. It seemed to be coming from the sky, massive and overwhelming. I remember thinking it must be some strange fever hallucination. And by the next morning, I had almost convinced myself that's all it was. But then, I saw the new mark, this time on the back of my neck. It burned slightly, like a fresh scar. I was confused. The light, the mark, it didn't make sense. The next night, it happened again. The light returned, but this time, something was different. My body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped inside myself. I couldn't even scream. My limbs felt distant, disconnected, and all I could do was watch. I felt myself slowly being lifted off the bed, but there was no one there. No hands. No figures. It was as if the light itself was pulling me up, raising me from the ground. And then, darkness. The next memory I have is brief, fragmented. I woke up, but it wasn't in my bed. I was in some kind of aircraft. I panicked, tried to move, but before I could do anything, I was put under again. Everything went black. When I woke up the second time, I was in this place, this house, if you can even call it that. 2 new scars marked my body, and it was clear I had been operated on. But there was no pain, no discomfort, nothing. It made no sense. The first few days, those were the worst. The isolation, the fear, not knowing why I was there, what they wanted from me, or if I would ever see my family again. The first test came almost immediately after I arrived. It couldn't have been more than 20 or 30 hours later. I woke up in the middle of the night, though night felt endless, stretching on for what seemed like days. Panic set in when I saw something on the floor, something that hadn't been there before. I stared at it for a moment, confused, before slowly making my way over to see what it was. It was a flower. It scared me, but it also made me deeply curious, especially because I worked as a botanist. I realized immediately that this flower wasn't from Earth. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its petals were translucent, almost glass-like, and when the firelight touched them, they shimmered with a faint iridescence. The leaves were a dark, deep green, but they had veins running through them that pulsed faintly, almost as if they were alive. I knelt down next to it, careful not to touch it at first. My instincts told me it was fragile, yet it seemed too deliberate, too perfectly placed. I knew it was some sort of message, but I couldn't figure out what they were trying to say. I stared at it for hours, turning it over in my mind. What could it mean? Why a flower? Days passed, and I watched the flower closely. I couldn't let it out of my sight. I knew the answer was hidden somewhere within it, within its refusal to wilt, to decay. I began taking notes, cataloging its every reaction, every subtle change. And that's when I noticed something else. It glowed at night. As soon as the darkness crept in, the flower would emit a soft, almost soothing light, like a beacon calling out in the shadows. The realization hit me slowly. The flower wasn't wilting. Normally, a plucked flower begins to wither, but not this one. There wasn't a single sign of decay. It remained as vibrant, as pristine as the moment I found it. That's when the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't just a plant. They were trying to show me something. Something about life. Something about endurance. At first, I thought it might be some form of bioluminescence. But no, it was more than that. It didn't just glow randomly. It responded to the darkness around it. It was sending a signal. But what? I ran my fingers over its petals, feeling their smooth texture. And the longer I studied it, the more I began to understand. The glow was steady, constant, but at times, it pulsed in a pattern, in a rhythm. I thought I was imagining it at first, but then I timed it and realized it was exact. It was like Morse code, but not with light, with life. eyes decoding the pattern, afraid to let the flower out of my sight. The message wasn't in the flower itself. It was in its behavior. The rhythm of its pulses matched something familiar, something terrifying. It was a sequence I had seen before in my studies of viruses, in the way viral infections behave. And then it hit me. The flower wasn't just a message. It was a clue. They were showing me that they needed my help to fight something much larger than myself, much larger than them. They gave me more flowers, more clues, but it wasn't obvious. I think they were testing me, pushing me to figure it out on my own, while feeding me the pieces. Years passed, and little by little, they revealed the truth. A virus was coming to my planet. A virus with 100% mortality. No treatment, no cure, no hope. They told me I had already been infected when they took me, though I was still in the early, harmless stages, because the virus hadn't yet mutated. They knew about my work on Earth, though I have no idea how. Maybe they had been watching me, studying me from a distance. And then it all clicked. I realized they were the ones who had taken samples from me while I was sick, back on Earth. They had been testing me all along, even before I knew they existed. I realized then just how intelligent these beings were. They had chosen a way to communicate with me that went beyond words, beyond language. They knew that as a botanist, I would understand the symbolism, the science, the life behind the flower. They knew I would figure it out. And I did. It was their way of showing me I had been chosen. It terrified me, but it fascinated me even more. The precision, the intellect it took to craft such a message, it was overwhelming. That's when everything came together. I was infected. That's why they took me. They needed to study someone with the virus, someone who had it while still healthy, someone they could test before and after the symptoms appeared. But more than that, they needed my mind. They needed to understand how I thought. Their psychological experiments. They were designed to mimic the effects of the virus, to see how it would change me, to anticipate how my mind would unravel as the infection progressed. They were trying to understand how to save humanity by understanding what the virus would do to us. It was about a year or two after I arrived that they told me they had sent a capsule back to Earth, warning humanity about the virus, a warning about what was coming. I think about my family often, my parents, my siblings, my friends. They have no idea what happened to me. They probably think I just disappeared, vanished, without a trace. I wonder if they've received the warning, if they know what's coming. I wonder if they'll ever know the truth, that I didn't leave them willingly, that I was taken. I think about the empty space I must have left in their lives, the questions they must have, the pain I must have caused. I've come to terms with what they did. Yes, I was terrified, and yes, I was heartbroken in the beginning. But now, I understand. I know they didn't mean to hurt me. They were only trying to save our planet, even if it meant sacrificing my life for the greater good. I often receive more messages from them. Over the years, they've even started to come closer to me, though always only at night. I find that strange, but I've gotten used to it. I walk outside more now. After after realizing they mean me no harm. At first, I was terrified, unsure if I could survive the atmosphere. I didn't know if it was like Earth, or if I needed some kind of protection. But nothing happened. Maybe they did something to me during the operation. I've thought about it a lot. I don't think it really occurred to them how our televisions worked until they brought it back to their planet. It was as if they just knew we used them and thought, she'll need one of these. I can't help but wonder how they did their research, if you can call it that, on how we live on Earth. They tried to replicate a house as best they could, based on what they knew about us. They certainly didn't focus much on the decor. It's all been kept very simple and spacious. It feels a bit like I'm a celebrity here. When I step outside at night, there are thousands of glowing eyes watching me from a distance. At first, it was terrifying. But now, I know they're just curious about what I look like. I suppose we'd do the same if one of them lived among us on Earth. In a way, I've become a kind of attraction. I think aliens come from all over the planet just to catch a glimpse of me at night. It's almost funny when I think about it. Still, I prefer to go out during the day, when it's quieter, when I don't feel so watched. I think they know how bored I get sometimes. They've given me all sorts of things to keep me entertained, though I still struggle to figure out what some of their gadgets are for. They even gave me a dog. Well, something that kind of resembles a dog. I know they meant well, but I have to admit, it scared the life out of me at first. I couldn't even be in the same room with it, let alone bring myself to look at it. It took me a couple of years, but I finally realized it has its own kind of charm. It's a bit odd, and I still have no idea what it eats. But they're trying to lift my spirits. It's sweet of them, and it's the thought that counts. It understands everything I ask of it. It doesn't respond, but it understands. And that's both comforting and unsettling at the same time. I think, in the end, we all learn to adapt to the unimaginable. I never thought I'd live this life. Far from home, far from Earth, surrounded by beings so different from us. But I've learned something here about endurance, about life, about connection. Maybe I'll never see my family again. Maybe they'll never know the truth. But even in the darkest places, even in the most isolated corners of the universe, I found kindness. I found a way to survive. And sometimes, that's all we can hope for.